doing it.
Are we live?
We are, well, we're recording. We're recorded. We're not live. I don't think we'll ever be live, but maybe not. Who knows? Who knows where this will go? But welcome to the podcast with no name.
Thought we've got a couple of names, right? I've seen a couple of good ideas.
We do. We have a couple of ideas floating around. Right now, Ground Pass is my favorite because, first of all, you already had a blog. Was it a blog called
It was a
Ground
blog, yeah, which you can go and find if you want and try and dig through my early tennis writings.
Everyone go look for it. But I thought that was a great name because it kind of it's everyone's entry into a tennis tournament. The first thing that is debatable too, but that could be a different topic for a different day. But usually when you've never been to a tennis tournament before, the first thing you do is you get a ground pass, which is your entry into the tournament before you maybe go for the high ticket seats or anything like that. But I like the name Ground Pass. There was also another one called Casual Fan for, because this is a podcast for the
casual tennis podcast, which, very chill vibes. We're sort of sat here in our comfy clothes.
Exactly. I like that, the Casual Tennis Podcast. But yes, we're gonna knock around some names, but I have this saying that I stole from someone, obviously, because the best artists steal, which is perfection is the enemy of the good. And sometimes I think thinking too much of like, what could it be? How could you do it? And then you just never do it. So this is my attempt to just do it.
Yeah. And it's much more fun. And being a bit messy, all of my favorite podcasts that I've listened to have been just two people chatting, and it's just nonsense sometimes.
Yeah.
And
that might be this podcast for a while, guys.
If you've ever listened to any other podcasts that I'm on, you will know this is very much the vibe that we go for. So I think we're all good on that.
We're in a good. Okay, good. We're moving in the right direction. But this is a casual tennis podcast, and I wanted to sort of give a synopsis of why I wanted to do this. I've been a tennis fan for a very long time, and I've had different levels of fandom throughout my whole life. I started off as a casual fan, and then once the Serena sisters started, who looked just like me, I got super into it and followed them for a long time. And then I kind of just stopped watching tennis for a long time. And then I came back into it. So I've had, sort of like ebbs and flows in my tennis viewing. But one thing I've always done is I've always gone to the US Open. US Open has always been my tournament to go to. And the US Open is also the tournament where you almost meet. I mean, I haven't been to much other tournaments, and I mostly my tennis tournament viewing is always within the United States. But I feel like the most casual fans are at the US Open. The most casual fans are at the US Open. There's so many.
Clear on the television, let's be honest.
You do have a point there. You do have a point. I know people who go to the US Open to hang out. The tennis is just happens. They just happen to be playing a tennis tournament, but people go to the US Open just to like grab a drink and have a meal with friends. And the tennis is somewhere in the background. Especially this year, I thought it's time to start talking to those people. Like, you're missing so much and paying so much, by the way, another topic, paying so much to come here, and you're missing so much of the tennis. So I kind of wanted something for the casual fan, someone who's maybe getting into tennis, just has tennis in the background, but maybe might want to get more into it.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've wanted to capture as well. We were talking about my old blog before, and that was the original purpose of the blog, was to tell my friends all about tennis.
Yeah.
And I realized none of them were actually reading it. It was random people on Twitter who were reading it. But
Always,
the
like everything.
always, yeah, and who were already fans a lot of the time. So I just kind of gave up and went with it. But I did try and write the odd thing to try and introduce people. But also, it's not necessarily the right medium. People aren't necessarily going to sit down and read a tennis blog. Whereas, hey, I am hoping that everyone involved is getting excited by two fans who want to let you into our world and our obsession. I mean, clearly we're so obsessed that
That
you
is
don't
a
even
good
know our
word.
name.
Obsession. That's a very, very good word. It is a little bit of an obsession. And maybe I'm doing this just because I wanted to talk to someone about tennis every 2 weeks.
I mean, let's face it, if this is the only chance to get, then go for it. How do you think this is how I ended up doing things like this as well. So
Yeah.
it does work. But I do notice from this intro that we've done so far that we've gone, hi, we're tennis fans, and nobody knows our names.
Hello, I'm Anastasia.
Hi, I'm Nick.
Yeah, we're both casual fans following tennis. Well, we're not casual fans. Let's be real. Let's be honest. We've moved beyond the casualness of our obsession. We're obsessed tennis fans, and we're hoping to share a little bit of our tennis obsession with you and to get you into the sport. I think that's the most important thing for me, because every year at the US Open, you know how everyone says, oh, I have a tech friend. When you have like a tech problem, you call that person. I'm the tennis friend. I'm the one who gets all
Yes.
the calls during the US Open being like, well, who's that?
Yeah, I've got the same thing over here where I am, but it's with Wimbledon a lot of the time. Obviously, being British, living in the UK, yeah, it tends to be Wimbledon. It's like, who's that? Oh, I'm the tennis obsessed one. I do have a reputation. The last 2 years, I've taken the whole Wimbledon 2 weeks off work and just like binge watched it at home, or gone. If I'm not there, I'm watching it on TV.
Yeah.
So yeah, you and I are kind of on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
Even if neither of us visited the other's home tournament.
Not yet, but one day. Enough of our rambling, because we could go on forever of how we all became tennis fans and all of that. And maybe through the series you'll find out more about that journey. But I wanted to jump right into the tennis, as they say. And I think one thing a lot of casual fans don't know, or people who are getting into tennis is all year round. I think
Yes, and that's
people,
something I have to explain to a lot of people.
exactly. And people don't realize it because, I'll post something on Instagram or something outside of one of the slams, which is how everyone is introduced to tennis. And they're like, wait, it's still happening? I'm like, no. This is a different tournament. But a lot of fans come into tennis through the 4 Grand Slams. And for everyone who doesn't know, there are 4 Grand Slams, and those are sort of, I would say, the World Cups of tennis. There are 4 of them. That's the easiest way to explain it. But in between all those World Cups, there are tons of other levels of tournaments, right?
Yes, there are. I mean, are we going to explain what those are, or are we going to
Not
delve into
right
that another
now,
day?
because again, this could be a 4 hour a 4 hour podcast and just like tennis terms. But I think as we go along, as you listen to us over time, you will start to learn, what's this tournament? What does the 1000 mean? What does a 500 mean? But I think it's really important to state how, and this will also come up, I think, in other ways when we start discussing, from time to time, when there's someone out there complaining about the length of the tour and how long the season is and things like that. Tennis is an all season, all round event.
And that's because it's a global sport. I mean, there's tournaments on definitely 5 continents. I think North, South, Europe, Asia, Australia. No, 6 continents, because there
Oh,
are
there
a
we go.
couple
Yeah.
in Africa.
Yeah.
And the other thing you've got to bear in mind, which is one of the reasons why I was talking about it, is it's funny that we're starting this podcast now at a time when tennis is currently taking place in a time zone that neither of our friends would watch.
At all. We are barely watching it. It's so painful. I'm getting so little sleep trying to keep up with the tennis. But tennis right now is in Asia. Specifically at the moment, as we speak, tennis is in China, which hasn't happened in a long time. Yeah.
No, it hasn't. And that's been for a couple of different reasons. Mostly due to COVID restrictions,
Hmm.
where China wasn't really letting people in for sporting events. It wasn't just affecting tennis. There were other sports that had events in China that got cancelled. There was some other things going on with the women's tour, which is probably a
Right.
little bit too long-winded to get into right now specifically, but there was another reason the women's tour wasn't going there.
This is true.
Um,
Yeah. A really important reason, which we will one day get into.
Yeah, and I don't want to like gloss over it at all.
No.
But this is not the now is not the time.
No.
Is more
And
what
I
I'm
probably
saying.
will put in our little like description box explainer of something a little bit about what's going on, what that situation was, so you can read on it and catch up before we do. Mhm.
Yeah, or just Google Peng Shui.
Or that. Exactly. But yeah, so the tours, both the WTA and ATP tours are back in China. And a little bit about why I asked Nick to do this podcast with me is that, I mean, over the years, I've gone back and forth, but right now I really do follow intensely the ATP tour, which is the men's tour. And you are the opposite.
Yes, I am much more interested in the WTA tour, which is the women's tour. I feel like we're going to be talking in acronyms. Do we want to explain what those mean?
Yes.
So the ATP tour is stands for the Association of Tennis Professionals.
Hmm.
Which you're thinking, well, why is that? That sounds like it's an all-encompassing tour, which is what it was originally meant to be. But then 50 years ago, the women were like, "You're not paying us enough." Like the women were not getting paid anywhere near the same level as the men, so they broke away and formed their own tour, the Women's Tennis Association, and now which is why we have two separate tennis tours, one for the men, one for the women,
Yeah.
um, all due to gender politics of the 1970s.
Which we're really hoping at some point, hopefully in the near future, can change. And we can
Yes,
go back to just having one association handle everything and might even make tennis viewing even better. And we're not constantly having to split between like, what tournaments are we watching with the women's and what tournaments are we watching with the men? But I'm sure something that took so long to separate and I mean, it's been going what since the 70s.
yeah, 50 years this year they're celebrating the
Exactly.
WTA.
So they have 50 years this year, and it's going to take a while to sort of bring those two tours back together. But we could write a book on that if we tried.
I might do one day. Yeah.
But yeah, so tennis is happening right now. It's really difficult to pay attention to, but we're here to sort of also help give you the highlights of what's going on and help you try and start learning who these players are and who the players are in these tours and getting more involved. So tournaments in action right now. On the ATP side, we've got the China Open, which is a 500 event. And I think not in this specific episode, but in a future one, we will get into the different levels of the tournaments. But the China Open is a men's 500 event. And what's also happening is Astana. And I will just say
It's
right
in
now,
Kazakhstan.
is it Kazakhstan?
It's Kazakhstan.
It's Kazakhstan. I'm going to butcher a lot of pronunciations. I really am. And I
Oh,
do.
don't go with my pronunciations because I'm a posh British man.
Don't go with mine either. But we will try our best. We will try our best to like get do as as well as we can. But there is a 250 in ATP happening as well at the moment. And
Hmm.
is there currently, I'm so behind, is there currently just one WTA event happening right now?
Yes. So yes, there is a 1,000 event happening in Beijing, in China. So it's the Women's China Open has literally just started. The men's has just ended, which is another weird time to come in. If you're coming in like trying to get into tennis now, you're coming in weird timings because usually a tournament runs from Monday to Sunday. But the
Yep.
last couple of weeks on the ATP tour in China, they've been running Wednesday to Tuesday.
Yes.
Um,
And this has to
because
do with the Davis Cup and making sure players had enough time to travel to China from the Davis Cup. So it's, tennis can be complicated, and we're really asking a lot of you to get into this sport, but we will try our best. So yes, the schedule is a little off right now, but I think right after the China Open, they kind of do go back to being sync
Yes.
a little
So
bit.
yeah, so in they're going to be playing a 1000 event in Shanghai, the Shanghai Masters, which is well, we won't get into too deep. It is one of the biggest tennis tournaments on the calendar, and
Yeah,
that starts on Wednesday, I think, and then that will run until Sunday. Not this Sunday, like the following Sunday. So it's going to be a week and a half long event.
right.
So just doing qualifying for that right now.
Right. Remember when we said tennis never stops? They're literally playing a tournament now and have already started qualies for the next one. So it really doesn't ever stop. But what let's just pick those tournaments. What on the WTA side so far has happened in the 1000 event that piques your interest or
I think looking at the biggest stories that are happening from the event in Beijing, the China Open, which obviously that's we can go into the complications around that. I would say so far the biggest story has to be the victory of 16-year-old Mira Andreeva
ooh,
beating Barbora Krejcikova, who is a Grand Slam champion. Not only, and which is obviously a big deal because Krejcikova's ranking and everything else, but also because Andreeva is that young and she's beaten Krejcikova twice in 1 year, which is
Jesus.
ridiculous. And honestly, this girl, despite the fact she's 16 years old, is already ranked in the top 50 women's professional tennis players in the world, and that's why a lot of fans are very, very excited about her.
Yeah, and didn't she just burst into the scene? I feel like she came out of nowhere during the Madrid Open, and all of a sudden, here was this very confident 16-year-old who was just beating everybody.
Yeah, and she was beating very, very good players. I'm not, again, we're trying to ease you into things, but the quality of players she beat when she played in Madrid back in May was like you're talking like real world class high performing players, and she only got beaten by Arina Sabalenka, who is currently the women's world number one.
Yeah.
Um, and she was very close to getting to the quarterfinals at Wimbledon this year. She took a set off Coco Gauff in France.
Who
This
just won the
girl
US Open?
just won the US Open. Like this, yeah. I'm hoping people have heard of Gauff, but yeah, this girl, despite the fact that you might look at her and go, "Well, how on earth is she doing that?" Like, she's unbelievably cool-headed. I've never seen someone so young have such a good grasp of what shot to play and remaining calm under in the situation. And the thing is that she's not anywhere near as good as she could be yet, which is
Right.
incredible.
Right. That's really true. Yeah. So, I mean, she's someone who definitely burst on the scene for me in Madrid. And, I think like with most casual fans, like the first, what sort of attaches you to a player is their personality. And she burst onto the scene with a really big personality. I think they said during that, spring, summer time frame that she was being followed around by the Netflix cameras. And I'm like, yep, that's someone who I can't wait to see what they do with her story. With Breakpoint, which is the sort of, yeah, it's the Netflix version of Drive to Survive, but for tennis.
Yeah, the tennis Drive to Survive, yeah.
Which I'm pretty sure a lot of casual fans, when that show first came out, I never, I'm a tennis fan, so I watched it just to see what they had to offer. But I was actually surprised by how many people watched that and then came to the US Open. That was a lot of like conversations I was listening to on the grounds. It was like, oh, that person was in, the TV show. I was like, oh, wow, people watched that and then showed up at the US Open. So it's a great way to introduce players. And I'm really excited to see how Mira goes. But so she's on to the next round now, yes?
Yeah, she's on to the next round. So I'm just having a look now where she's at. So yeah, she is into round two. So she's going to be playing a veteran in Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova.
Me, she's
Not this
playing me
Anastasia.
later.
Wait, uh, what are you doing, Anastasia? You need to be training. You got a match in a couple of hours.
Couple hours, let's go. I have a
Um,
plane to catch.
um, but yes, Pavlyuchenkova, who's been on the tour for a while. I mean, she's like early 30s now. Been she kind of burst onto the scene, not quite as young as Andreeva, but sort of as a 19-year-old in late 2000s, early 2010s, and then has a very respectable career, but never quite hit the heights that maybe some people thought she would. But very tough opponent for Andreeva, nevertheless.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how she goes. I think another player a lot of people will probably be super interested in, just also because of her just, general popularity, is Coco Gauff. And she's in this tournament. I think she just won her first round match.
She did, yeah, against a very, very tricky opponent. Yet another Russian, Katerina Alexandrova, who's a big hitter and actually beat Goff earlier this year. But Goff was going through a bit of a rough patch at that point.
Yeah.
But still one of the toughest first round draws she could have got. But she dealt with it pretty well from what I can gather. And yeah, she's playing, she's through, she's into the second round of the event. And she's got a tough section, but she's backing up that US Open win so far.
Which is, I think, the biggest part for me with following tennis and keeping up with tennis. And, there were years where you would go into a tournament, at least for me, and you're like, okay, well, the Williams sisters are going to win. One of them's going to win this tournament. And then there was a period where you just didn't know who to follow and you didn't know who to look to and who was going to be consistent. And I feel the women's tour is finally getting there. And I'm really loving seeing Grand Slam winners defend their titles in a way where and not defend their titles directly at the event, but like throughout the season. So it's not like they win a title and then they disappear. You never see them again, which tends to be a thing sometimes. But even watching Marketa Vondrousova, who won Wimbledon this year, come into the American swing and, win matches. It was so lovely to see. I love seeing things like that.
Yeah, I think it's I look, we can do a whole episode on the merits of consistency versus chaos in tours. But you're right, the women's tour is heading into a direction where you're going to see some names more often than others, and we'll probably mention some of those names in future episodes as well, probably even the next one. So yeah, but like if you're just getting into tennis, maybe having just watched the US Open, start with Coco Gauff. She's going to be a name that's going to be around for a very long time. She's still only 19. And Andreeva as well. If you're just getting into tennis, you want someone like you could follow these players for the next 20 years.
Exactly. They're like, it's really a really funny story because I always think, oh, Coco is a veteran and she's been doing this for years. She's 19 years old. You have a lot of time to follow her.
She's another wonder kid, right? She came along when she was 15 and she beat Venus Williams at Wimbledon in her first match ever at Wimbledon. I mean, like that's just pressure out the gate.
And especially for someone like her, which, I'm sure a lot of people were then looking at her as like, you're the next one. Again, another 7-hour podcast.
Yes, that would be another podcast. Yes, Coco has been the chosen one for so long, which is why I was so happy for the US Open, that US Open win, because we've had a lot of chosen ones in tennis. And I've always felt sorry for the ones who didn't quite make it. For them personally, more than anything else. But she's got one, and that's all she needs.
That's all she needs. That's all she needs, and hopefully leads to a lot more. Well, on the men's side, so there are two tournaments happening right now on the men's side. The China Open, which is a 500 event, which is just below 1,000, obviously. And then the Kazakhstan event, which is a 250, which is just below that. There's been a lot going on. I think for people listening, the big name to sort of mention right away is Carlos Alcaraz is back on a court. Playing some really great tennis. He's someone who I think, again, I remember when I first started following him, I followed him because of his style of tennis. I really love that sort of unpredictability. he's at the net, he's at the baseline, then he just runs around the whole court. He's not a traditional, as they would say, baseline, just dueling back and forth sort of player. But he did not defend his US Open title from last year. But I think it's really nice to see him back on court doing well. It wasn't a great end to the US Open. So I was always wondering, what Carlos are we going to get back? But he did get a bit of a break in between. So he's definitely come back firing for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's not dropped a set yet in Beijing, and he's beaten some good players. So I agree with you. Like Carlos Alcaraz's box office, you cannot take your eyes off him. You don't know what he's going to do. And that's what makes him so exciting to watch. And the thing is, the kid can do literally everything. Again, another super young player. He's only 20,
Right.
which is, he's going to be around for a fair bit unless he injures himself.
Maybe that's the theme of this podcast. Young tennis stars.
I mean, actually, there's looking at sort of, because we're actually, depending on what time zone you're in, they're about to play the semi-finals in Beijing, or semi-finals if I want to sort of go American. Actually, every player in there is in their 20s. There's another young tennis player, younger end of the spectrum tennis player in there. There's a couple in sort of mid to late 20s in there. Another name that fans might recognize, particularly at the US Open, Daniel Medvedev is also playing.
Yes.
So he's in the semi-finals. Yes, you've got a big smile on your face about Medvedev.
He's definitely one of if you watch Daniel Medvedev play tennis, it's kind of he's such a non-traditional tennis player. He's so tall and lanky. You're like, what are you doing with your arms? Why are they everywhere? I think one of his nicknames, which I think is always perfect, is the octopus.
Yes.
Imagine an octopus playing tennis. There's no other way to describe it. He has arms and limbs everywhere and just reaches for all sorts of stuff. It's so non-traditional and sometimes not pretty, but that's what I like about it. I love the sort of just, he's quite the plus. I have no words to describe it right now other than an octopus playing tennis.
Yes. I think one of the women's tennis players, Iga Swiatek, once referred to him as a pretzel, and the way his arms end up in a still image of him.
Yeah. I hope I'll find a photo of him. I'm sure if I look on the internet, I'll find it and I'll post it. But it's of him. It was a forehand shot. So he's returning and his arm goes all the way across. And then the other one is literally that way. And I'm like,
yes.
He is a pretzel.
Yes, it is a pretzel. But I think the main reason I follow Medvedev is actually because of his personality. He is very, very quick-witted. He comes up with all kinds of crazy one-liners, some of which are mistranslations, or at least from him trying to get what he was in his head into English. Very, very good English speaker, but maybe there's a couple of quotes I can think of that maybe wasn't probably too exact translation.
I can probably think of the ones you're thinking of. But yes, it's like almost like the phrases he doesn't know sometimes where or how.
What the iconic moment, and maybe some of our listeners may have heard of this, was the 2019 US Open, which will never be topped even by Daniel Medvedev, of when he told a booing crowd, "Thank you for helping me win today."
It's the one, Daniil and the crowd. It's a love story. Sometimes they're fighting, sometimes they're not. You never know. Sometimes it's they're doing either or in the same match, and you're like, which is it? Which is it today? But yes, so he's playing as well. The semifinals, we're going to have a section, or at least I'm going to trial a section in this podcast called the Player of the Fortnight, because of course, something we didn't say at the beginning of this is right now we're attempting to do this podcast every 2 weeks. So we'll pop up on your feed every 2 weeks to give you what's up, what's happening in the world of tennis. And I want us to sort of pick a player that over the past 2 weeks has kind of, sparked our interest. I have mine. I'm going to have you think of yours while we continue on with the show. But at the end, we'll let you know. And I'm holding a player right now who is currently in the China Open, but that I want to talk about in that section. So I'll hold it for now. But so those are the tournaments that are happening. There are 2 tournaments happening in China. We won't go into the completed tournaments because the schedule is so crazy, and I'm almost waiting till it's back, in sync, and then we can talk about like past winners and things like that. But part of also what I want to talk about is news, things that are happening in tennis, because I think that's also an important part of being a fan, is knowing what's happening, knowing what's going on. Are we going to ever have tennis in Saudi Arabia? Who knows? I mean, we're already going to have the next gen, which is a tournament that's played on the ATP side of things. But to just talk about a little bit of news of the goings on in tennis. And one thing that I wanted to mention really quickly has to do with the schedule and just getting your thoughts a little bit of what you think, because obviously we're both in time zones where we can't watch tennis. That doesn't mean tennis shouldn't be global. That's actually the best part of tennis for me, is that it is global and it's played all over the world. But a lot of things that tennis players bring up, two in particular this week in Zverev and Kitkova, is the lateness of tennis, how late tennis is played. And as someone who lives in New York and goes to the US Open, the city never sleeps. We will watch tennis, whatever it is. But how do you feel about that? Because 2 players this year have, during the Asian swing, have come up with, I think Zverev played till 3 a.m. one night and Petra played till 1 a.m. Do you have thoughts on tennis lateness?
Yeah. Okay. So, from a selfish fan's perspective, if a tennis match is in the right time zone and it goes on super late, it's great for me because I can actually watch it.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to. There was an absolute epic that happened at the beginning of the year between Andy Murray, who's a British player, and an Australian player called Thanasi Kokkinakis, and they went for 5 hours in Australia. And they ended up finishing at like 3-4 a.m. their time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was meant that which ended up finishing about 4-5 in the afternoon, my time. So it was great because I could just have that on mute in the background while I was doing work. The problem with that was obviously Murray was knackered for his next match. And we've seen this time and again. And I think the opinion I've come to is, whilst from a fan's perspective, it can be brilliant because I can watch it.
Yeah.
For everyone involved, if you're working there and it's your job, it sucks.
Yeah.
If you're a player, it ruins your recovery time. Let alone you might be standing around for hours waiting to start a match even. You've got all the officials and the staff at the tournament who have to stay up and lose sleep over it. And who knows if they're getting overtime?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Probably not.
And the reality is, I would say if I have to sacrifice my entertainment for the benefit of other people's health, that's a worthy sacrifice for me. So that's where I'm kind of at with the lateness of tournaments, is that that something needs to be done to do it. And one of the things that annoys me is the way some of the media promote it is this massive physical achievement to play that late, and it kind of is, but it's not. But then, it's that old quote from Jurassic Park: just because you could doesn't mean you should. I think I've misquoted it, but
no, but
it's along those lines.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And it's really great hearing your perspective, because again, as someone who loves the US Open, and I'm so used to the sort of nightlife nature of the US Open because of the city that it's in. I remember the year Carlos won the US Open, he was playing till 2 or 3 in the morning. Every match, I think it was like 3 in a row, and he was like, oh, it's the latest match ever. And then he broke the record. He was like, it's the latest match ever. It definitely, there is an excitement to it sometimes, especially when you're in the audience. But I totally get your side of it too, where I wouldn't want to be playing at 3 a.m. in the morning. And it's sort of it's definitely a bigger topic. I think if you follow the French Open or even Wimbledon that has a curfew, it's definitely something that's talked about a lot in tennis, and it will come up as you follow the sport, where you'll have something like the French Open or even the US Open, where it's like you just play till whenever. And, if it's 4 a.m, same thing with Australia. Or you get a tournament like Wimbledon where, speaking of Andy Murray, there is a curfew. So you have to stop playing at a certain time. I think it's 11. Is it 11?
It's 11 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 11 p.m. And I remember his match with Tsitsipas that had to end and then finish the next day. And there's a lot of talk of, well, if it had just kept going, Andy might have won, but it went into the next day. And the result of the match was Tsitsipas won that match. So there's definitely pros and cons.
It's interesting that some of the dialogue around the late finishes at Wimbledon was that there were a lot of particularly American fans on the app formerly known as Twitter, where who were like, "Why don't you carry on going? This is madness." Like they were going, "This is madness." What, like from a sort of a organizational perspective?
Yeah.
And I found that absolutely fascinating. Interesting, Anastasia. I'm going to say, I think you're a hardcore enough fan. Do you know why there's a curfew at 11 p.m. at Wimbledon? It was an agreement with the local residents. It's for the neighborhood because there's people living right opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty much. So literally, it's like, yeah, because the only way they could agree to it was one of the conditions of them putting on a roof. Was
so it's almost like noise control.
Go on too late and keep us awake.
Yeah, it's noise control to kind of. Yeah, I get that. Okay, so we're going to start winding down because we're almost at an hour. But what's coming up next? What should people be watching? Now you're a super tennis fan. You've listened to us for 45 minutes and you're like, yep, I'm all in. I'm all in on the tennis. So what are the next tournaments coming up that people can tune into?
So do you mean just this week or are you talking next week as well?
I know. Isn't it really weird? It's really weird, but yes, this week and next week. I think on the ATP side, I'm like, it's time to get ready for the Shanghai Masters. Yes. And this would be a good time to explain that. So we've got the 4 Grand Slams. Right underneath the Grand Slams are the Masters events, the 1,000 events. And these can be as big or very close to as big as the Grand Slams. Shanghai Masters is coming up on the ATP side, and I think that's definitely going to be one to watch and where all the big guns are going to be coming out to play.
Yeah, absolutely. So for sure, that's nice and easy. If you want to follow the men's side, if you want to see Carlos Alcaraz and Daniil Medvedev in action, Novak Djokovic is not playing. He's taking some time off. But you've still got some big names to follow on that side. You've got some names you recognize: Alcaraz, Medvedev, Murray playing. So yeah, Sinner. Actually, Alcaraz and Sinner are playing tonight each other, which is a big deal if you're a tennis fan. And because those two have some battles. So this will probably be up after they've played, but you never know. Or you probably listen to this after they've played, but they might play again in Shanghai.
Yes.
But that's definitely, I agree with you that the main thing to focus on for the men's side. For the women, Beijing is also a Masters event, a 1,000 event.
And that just started, so you can pick that up right away. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got all the top players pretty much taking part. There haven't really been many shock exits. So we would talk about what's happening a little bit with Goff and Andreeva in that tournament. That's going to be carrying on. And then, to be honest, then I would imagine sort of the following week is still some tournaments in Asia, but the top players will probably be winding down as they prepare to travel to Mexico in a few weeks for a very special event that's happening there. Which we can
hopefully when we're back in 2 weeks, then we can start talking about those, which are basically the finals. Right? They're called finals.
The finals, yeah.
Yeah. Going to be in Cancun. But we'll talk about that next. So let's end on our player of the fortnight, which I'm going to start with mine. and his name is Yannick Sinner. Yannick
Oh, we already mentioned him. Your face just lights up at the mere mention of his name.
Yannick Sinner, who a lot of people listening, I think, will know simply because of his association with Carlos Alcaraz. They've had some battles on court. One, I think a lot of people saw first was their US Open 2022 match that went really long. But Yannick is someone I remember this spring. I went to the Miami Open and I watched one of Yannick's match, and there were these like three guys just sitting. They were all probably, sort of like late teens, early 20s, and they were all talking and they were all pointing at Sinner, and they were like, he's going to be the next. They literally said, they're like, he's going to win US Open this year. He almost did it last year, but he's going to win, So I think with the casual fan, Yannick Sinner is definitely someone in the zeitgeist, but he's my player of the fortnight mostly because he hasn't quite reached, I think, the heights that a lot of people have thought he would based on his matchup with Carlos Alcaraz, but specifically for the last tour, for the China Open, which is happening right now. Yannick is going through it. I do not know what is happening with Yannick Sinner. He's still winning. He's in the semifinals that we mentioned earlier with Carlos Alcaraz, but his road to get there have involved a fall, a medical timeout, and throwing up in a trash can. And that happened today when he played with Grigor Dimitrov. And he's just a fascinating player, I think, who seems to be having a lot of physical issues. It's not really about his tennis. I think his tennis holds up. But he's definitely someone who has had a few physical issues, but he still fights through it. And, I could do a whole dissertation, I think, on why I think players who are hurt shouldn't play. I'm like, go rest up and then come back. But he's definitely one to watch. He's my player of the fortnight. I'm super excited about the match that it's so hard for me to keep up with the time zone in Asia, because I'm like, is it tonight? Is it tomorrow morning? Is it 3 a.m. for me? I don't know. I'll figure it out. But he's my player to watch of the fortnight, and let's see how he does in the semifinals, and then, what happens to him in the Shanghai Masters.
Do you want my player of the fortnight?
Yes. Who is your player of the fortnight?
Okay, so obviously mine's going to be on the women's tour, because I think it'd be most of the time when we're doing this, I'll be picking one for the women's tour, unless it's just someone who's made me go, wow, I have to pick someone for the men's tour.
Yeah.
And for me, it's got to be Veronika Kudermetova, who just won the title in Tokyo. I was tempted by just going for Maria Sakkari just because she's got the most wins in those 2 weeks, but Kudermetova, or Kudermetova, I need to actually check the pronunciation of that, but she beat Iga Swiatek. She scrapped her way to the title. She beat Jessica Pegula, who, if you're an American fan, you will probably have heard of as being one of your top two players from the States. And in the final. And I think Kudermetova gets it for me because she, up until this point, had not been having a great few months. Like from June to now, she was struggling to win matches. And then this week, she finally turned it on. I think she must have had some kind of physical problem that she's had to manage for a few weeks.
Probably,
and that's probably why, because she did have to pull out of a match in Berlin back in June. And that just where it all kind of spiraled from there. So it was great to see her turn it back on and beat some really, really good players and acquit herself well. So, I'm going to go with very first player of the fortnight being Veronika Kudermetova. And I've talked a lot about Russian players today.
Which, another topic for another day. But wow, that's episode 1 of the podcast with no name. We did it. Yay. But thank you for joining us. We will be back in your feed in 2 weeks we'll pick a day when we'll always show up in 2 weeks, and you'll learn more about us as we go along. But this was our first trial, and hopefully in 2 weeks we'll have a name, right? Can we say that, Nick? We'll have a name in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we'll have a name. We're pretty close to one already.
We are pretty close to one, I think. So we'll see you then.